Since Israel's genocide began, a recurring theme of our coverage has been that Israeli leaders and officials made their intentions to commit war crimes, to commit crimes against humanity, and indeed to commit genocide very clear from the very start. And so it remains. Bezalel Smotrich is the finance minister in Benjamin Netanyahu's government, and he has a history of making statements underlining support for war crimes and genocide long before the 7th of October. Those statements have, of course, intensified since. This April, the editorial of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz was entitled "Smotrich Must Pay the Price for His Repeated Calls for Genocide of Palestinians." They noted, he declared, in reference to cities in Gaza, there are no half jobs. Rafah, Deir el-Balah, Nusrat, total destruction. Thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. There is no place for them under heaven. Now, they added, Haaretz, about these comments, they said, plain and simple, total destruction. There is no room for interpretation. Quite correct. Haaretz rightly noted that the finance minister was openly advocating genocide and yet remained in government, in a key position, of course. Now, in August, he declared in a speech that it may be justified and moral to starve the people of Gaza. And of course, Israel has, as we keep focusing on, pursued a deliberate policy of starvation in Gaza, which is at the very core of the International Criminal Court's issuing of arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defence minister, Yoav Gallant. In the latest speech, Smotrich has declared that Israel must permanently occupy Gaza and that it will or can more than halve Gaza's population within 2 years. Let's listen to what he says.
אפשר וצריך לכבוש את רצועת עזה, לא צריך לפחד מהמילה הזאת. אפשר וצריך לקחת שם אחריות אזרחית, תנאי בל יעבור, אין לי זמן עכשיו להעריך, שמים כבר שאתה צריך לסיים. מפחידים אותי על עלויות ועל זה קשקוש בלבוש, פשוט קשקוש, אין שקר גדול מזה. זה לא עולה כל כך הרבה כסף, ובוא, צה"ל יצטרך להיות שם בוטות לגרעון, כדי להילחם בטרור, לשמור על הביטחון ולמנוע מעזה, להתחמש מחדש ולחזור ולהיות איום על אזרחי מדינת ישראל, לא בשביל לשלוט שם במאמץ האזרחי. על הדרך הוא גם לשלוט במאמץ האזרחי, זה הדרך היחידה להשמיד את השלטון האזרחי של חמאס. חמאס קודם כל תנועה אזרחית, על גבי זה היא בנתה את הזרוע הצבאית שלה. אין דרך אחרת. וגם אם זה יעלה קצת כסף, הפחידו אותי, היה לנו זה דיון בצבא, אמרו לי, זה יעלה 5 מיליארד. אני אומר שקר, כן? לא יעלה שום 5 מיליארד, מקסימום כמה מאות מיליונים. אבל אמרתי להם, גם עם 5 מיליארד אני קונה את זה עכשיו. עליתם לי בשנה האחרונה 250 מיליארד שקל בשנה, 5 מיליארד אני יכול לפרוץ את זה ל-50 שנה קדימה, קניתי בתשלומים. אם זה מה שאני צריך כדי לשמור על הביטחון של מדינת ישראל, אז הייתה אמרו עליי. אבל עוד פעם, זה לא יעלה. לא מתקרב לסכומים האלה בכלל. ואותו דבר בלבנון, ואותו דבר ביהודה ושומרון. רק אז הפספסתי, כמובן. אין ספק שעידוד הגירה מרצון, וגם זה לדעתי הזדמנות שנפתחת עם הממשל החדש. גם פה, אני חושב שכמה שנדבר על זה פחות, נוכל לעשות יותר. זה כמו ביהודה ושומרון לאורך שנים, כן? יש איזה יחס הפוך בין ההכרזות והדיבורים לבין היכולת לבצע בפועל. אפשר לייצר מצב שעזה בעוד שנתיים, עם פחות מחצי מהאוכלוסייה הנוכחית שלה, זה עולם אחר. כל דיוני היום שאחרי נראים אחרת לחלוטין, עם שליטה מוחלטת של מדינת ישראל. צריך גם להחזיר את החטופים בתוך כל התהליך הזה, גם על זה צריך לדבר. זה מפתח ענק ליהודה ושומרון, תהיה הגירה מרצון מעזה, לכולם ברור שיש מודל, וזה שם את מדינת ישראל במקום אחר בכלל.
To quote, it is possible to create a situation that Gaza in 2 years has less than half of its current population. He talks there about supposed voluntary migration. Clearly no such thing exists. What he's referring to is the conditions of Gaza being made unbearable for the Palestinian civilian population, as well as, of course, the use of violence to drive them out. In other words, ethnic cleansing. And in any case, he knows from his support of starvation that depriving civilians of the essentials of life, as well as the use of mass violence, the destruction of the healthcare system and so on, all of this is causing an unknown huge spike in what is clinically described as the excess death rate. That is the number of deaths above what is projected from natural attrition. All the evidence of conflicts involving intense levels of destruction tell us that most people do not die of direct violence, they die from other causes, like the lack of healthcare. It is notable too that he refers to this strategy of collapsing the civilian population as being a model elsewhere to be emulated, notably in the West Bank, which he labels with the biblical term Judea and Samaria and Lebanon. And if you think there is room for doubt, let's listen to what he said subsequently in this speech.
שום הסכם שיחתם, אם יחתם, לא יהיה שווה את הנייר שהוא כתוב עליו, זה בכלל לא מעניין. מה שמעניין זה שפירקנו להם את הצורה ונמשיך לפרק אותה. ולא ניתן להם לבנות מחדש, וכל מי שירים את הראש יכתוב. עכשיו, זה המבחן. אני חושב שהציבור הישראלי והצבא וההנהגה יותר מפוקחים היום. לא אגיד לכם שאני לא חושש, בסוף יש כן מדרון חלק ומתרגלים ורוצים שקט, אבל יש לי תחושה שכולנו אחרי 7 לאוקטובר, ובטח אחרי שנה שלמה של מלחמה נמצאים במקום תודעתי אחר לחלוטין. וזו ההחלטה שלנו. אין דבר שזז, ומה שזז, מת. זה הכל. ונתקף ומושמד.
So he says, what's important is that we beat the hell out of them, and we'll continue to beat it. We won't let them rebuild, and anyone who lifts his head will get beat. He goes on, nothing makes a move, and what moves dies. That's all. And is attacked and annihilated. Clear, straightforward genocidal intent. Once again, note the role of the Western media here. There is barely any coverage of these comments. I mean, listen to these comments. I mean, this is just absurd. If this was a state hostile to the West, and you had the finance minister talking about halving the population of a land they had occupied, just imagine for a moment the response. Imagine Putin said this about Ukraine. Yet there's barely any coverage. Putin's finance minister, let me be correct. There's barely any coverage for these comments. The finance minister of Israel is openly committing to halving the Palestinian population of Gaza in 2 years, and this is apparently not deemed newsworthy. As I keep on saying, the Western media not only failed from the start to frame their coverage around these statements of intent by Israeli leaders, which proved the most accurate predictor of what indeed Israel has gone on to do, they generally failed to report them at all, and when they did, buried them and stripped those statements of significance. Some wider context, as the brilliant Palestinian analyst Mohammed Shahada this week puts it about latest reports, Israeli experts estimate Gaza's reconstruction will cost between $100 to $200 billion to restore buildings to the lowest standard. That's 575% to 1,150% the size of the entire Palestinian economy. He adds, this is what we mean by genocide. Israel ensured it'd be impossible for Gaza to sustain life for decades to come. Shemuel Meir, a former IDF officer, meanwhile tweets that Gaza is being turned into a flattened wasteland, using bulldozers and booby-trapped vehicles, wiping out entire streets as well as houses. He says Israeli citizens aren't aware of this because it's not reported in Israeli media, and then they are surprised by the decisions of the International Criminal Court, he says, in The Hague. Following reports that only 11 out of 109 aid trucks managed to get into Gaza, Shahada notes that this means 68 grams of food per Gazan. In Stalin's Gulag, he adds, it was 950 grams per person. And note that when aid does get in, it is being blocked from getting to civilians, including because the Israeli army is allowing criminal gangs, including blatant collaborators and ISIS-linked militants, to steal the aid, whilst killing security personnel who are trying to protect the aid. As UNRWA, the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency and the main humanitarian agency in Gaza, which Israel is seeking to destroy entirely, as they note, hunger in Gaza is at critical levels, with people scavenging through weeks-old waste for scraps of food. As winter approaches, conditions are rapidly deteriorating, and survival is impossible without immediate humanitarian aid. As the Office for the Coordination, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs further notes, with the onset of heavy rains, 1.6 million people in makeshift shelters urgently need assistance, and of the 41 attempts by the UN to support people besieged in northern Gaza so far in November, 37 were denied or 4 impeded. The survivors in Gaza are being driven by the Israeli military literally into the ocean. Gazans have been crammed into increasingly small places, specifically the low-lying Al-Mawazi area, which is being flooded as sea levels rise, with kill zones on each side if they try and flee. Mohammed Shahada notes that 10,000 tents have been destroyed within 2 days by rain and sea, and 110,000 tents are damaged, worn out, and unusable. That is, he says, over 80% of tents in Gaza. Indeed, UNICEF report Palestinians testifying to sea waves sweeping over tents and Palestinians freezing as winter now, of course, approaches. Once again, there is no excuse for pleading ignorance, for claiming, I did not know what was really happening at the time. The Israeli state has been extremely and deafeningly clear about its genocidal intentions from day one. Their leaders scream their intentions to the world in the least subtle fashion possible, and we can see the overwhelming evidence on the ground because we are literally watching the first live stream genocide in history. We can see this genocidal plan being implemented, and we know because of the work of Palestinian journalists who've suffered the biggest slaughter of journalists in recorded history because of Palestinian civilians on the ground, because of the UN, because of aid agencies, because of human rights agencies. Overwhelming evidence every single day of this genocidal plan as it is implemented. Do not let those who aided and abetted this historic abomination get away with it. Not our politicians, not our media outlets. Please like and subscribe. Do also subscribe to my Substack if you want. Just go to owenjones.news and you can subscribe there, where we have original work. Also, we're going to be publishing text versions of videos because some of you asked for that. You can also keep the show on the road at patreon.com/owenjones84 to try and offer an alternative to this pro-genocide media. We're looking to expand and professionalise. You will see that in the hopefully coming days and the coming weeks. Do leave your thoughts, subscribe, listen to the podcast, and I will speak to you soon.